Golden hour light bathed the Georgia World Congress Center in warm amber tones as limousines began their slow procession toward the VIP entrance. The annual Atlanta Prosperity Gala drew the city's elite every October, a glittering showcase of wealth disguised as charity. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stood near the security checkpoint, one hand resting lightly on the tactical vest beneath her Navy Atlanta PD jacket, the other holding the lead attached to Max's harness. The Belgian Malinois sat at attention beside her, tan and black fur catching the late afternoon sun, dark eyes scanning each approaching vehicle with methodical precision. The red carpet stretched from the drop-off point to the convention center's glass doors, lined with velvet ropes and flanked by photographers jockeying for position. Local news crews had set up platforms on either side, cameras trained on the arrival zone. Sarah could hear the excited chatter of reporters preparing for live broadcasts, the occasional burst of applause as recognizable faces emerged from luxury vehicles. The atmosphere felt more Hollywood than Atlanta, an artificial glamour that sat uneasily against the city's skyline, visible beyond the perimeter. Sarah's radio crackled with updates from other units positioned around the venue. Officer Marcus Hayes coordinated the outer perimeter, his voice steady and professional as he confirmed clear zones and vehicle checks. Detective Laura Chen had been assigned to the interior, working with event security to monitor the ballroom and private suites. The operation was standard for high-profile events, a visible police presence that served dual purposes: reassurance for attendees and deterrence for anyone considering disruption. Max shifted slightly, adjusting his position without breaking his focused observation of the approaching traffic. Sarah glanced down at him, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders that indicated heightened alertness rather than distress. 7 years of partnership had taught her to read his body language like a second language, to distinguish between routine vigilance and genuine concern. Right now he was working, processing information through senses far more acute than her own. A silver Rolls-Royce pulled forward, its polished surface reflecting the golden light in rippling patterns. The driver, a uniformed chauffeur in his 60s, rolled down the window and presented credentials without prompting. Sarah checked the manifest on her tablet, confirmed the passenger list, then signaled Max forward. The K-9 circled the vehicle smoothly, nose working the air near the trunk, the wheel wells, the passenger compartments. After a complete sweep, he returned to Sarah's side and sat, the clear signal for no detection. The chauffeur nodded his thanks and proceeded to the red carpet, where a state senator and his wife emerged to camera flashes and polite applause. Sarah logged the vehicle clearance and turned her attention to the next arrival, a black Mercedes S-Class that gleamed like obsidian in the fading daylight. The pattern repeated: credentials check, K-9 sweep, clearance logged. Each vehicle brought another piece of Atlanta's power structure: CEOs, philanthropists, entertainment figures, political operatives. The guest list read like a directory of influence. As the 6th vehicle approached, Sarah noticed Max's ears pivot forward a fraction of a second before her own eyes registered the limousine. It was larger than most of the others, a stretched Lincoln Navigator in midnight black with tinted windows that reflected nothing but darkness. The vehicle moved slowly, almost deliberately, its approach timing carefully measured to avoid bunching up behind the Mercedes ahead. When the limousine stopped at the checkpoint, the driver's window descended to reveal a man in his 40s, professional but with an edge of impatience in his jaw. He extended a laminated pass before Sarah could request it, his movements efficient and practiced. She scanned the credentials: chartered service, passenger listed as Marcus Donovan, CEO of Donovan Development Corporation. The name triggered immediate recognition. Donovan's company had been responsible for 3 major downtown construction projects in the past 2 years, his face appearing regularly in business sections and on billboards advertising luxury condominiums. Sarah stepped back and gestured for Max to begin his sweep. The K-9 rose smoothly and moved toward the limousine's front end, starting his methodical circuit of the vehicle. He checked the front bumper, moved along the passenger side, inspected the rear quarter panel. Everything appeared routine until Max reached the rear of the vehicle. Then he stopped. The change was immediate and unmistakable. Max's entire body went rigid, his head lowering slightly as his nose oriented toward the trunk area. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't display any of the overt signals that untrained observers might expect. He simply froze, locked onto whatever scent signature had arrested his attention. Sarah's pulse quickened. She'd seen this response before, and it never meant anything good. The driver called from his window, voice tinged with irritation. "Everything all right back there? We're running behind schedule." Sarah ignored him, her focus entirely on Max. The K-9 hadn't moved, hadn't shifted his attention, hadn't given any indication of releasing the alert. She approached slowly, keeping her body language calm despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. When she reached Max's position, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulders, feeling the coiled tension beneath his fur. "What is it, boy?" she asked quietly. Though she knew he wouldn't break focus to respond, the question was more for her benefit, a verbal acknowledgement of the shift in circumstances. Behind the tinted rear window, Sarah saw movement. Someone inside the limousine was aware of the delay. The driver opened his door and stepped out, clearly preparing to voice stronger objections. Sarah raised her hand in a stopping gesture while keying her radio with the other. "Dispatch, this is Collins at VIP entry. I need backup at Checkpoint Alpha. K-9 has an alert on a vehicle." The response came immediately. "Copy that, Collins. Sending Hayes and Chen to your location. ETA 2 minutes. The driver approached, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Look, officer, I don't know what the problem is, but Mr. Donovan has a speaking engagement in 20 minutes. We really need to move." Sarah kept her position between the driver and Max, her hand still resting on the K-9's back. "Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle and wait by the security barrier. This is a routine procedure." "Routine?" The driver gestured toward the red carpet, where another limousine had been waved through without incident. "You just cleared that one in 30 seconds. What's different about this?" Before Sarah could respond, the rear passenger door opened. Marcus Donovan emerged, his 6-foot frame clad in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, diamond cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his jacket. His face, familiar from countless media appearances, bore an expression of calculated displeasure. He was in his early 50s, with silver-touched dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to deference. "Lieutenant Collins, isn't it?" Donovan's voice carried the smooth confidence of practiced public speaking. "I recognize you from the community outreach programs. Your K-9 unit does excellent work." Sarah noted the deliberate use of her rank and name, the attempt to establish familiarity and commonality. It was a negotiation tactic, professionally executed. "Mr. Donovan, I need you to remain by the vehicle while we complete our security check." Donovan smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. Of course, though I hope we can expedite this. I'm the keynote speaker tonight, and the Foundation is counting on my remarks to set the tone for the fundraising portion of the evening." The mention of his speaking role was another calculated move, an implied pressure point. Sarah remained unmoved. "This will take as long as necessary, sir. Please step back to the security barrier." Max still hadn't released his alert position. If anything, his focus had intensified, his body language screaming urgency in the subtle ways only Sarah could fully interpret. She glanced toward the access road and saw Officer Hayes jogging toward them, his hand instinctively near his service weapon. Detective Chen emerged from the convention center entrance, her shorter frame moving with deceptive speed. The gathering of additional officers drew attention from the press area. Cameras began swiveling toward the checkpoint, photographers sensing a story developing. The bright lights of video cameras clicked on, illuminating the scene with harsh white brilliance that contrasted sharply with the golden hour ambience. Hayes reached Sarah's position, slightly out of breath. "What have we got?" Max alerted on the trunk. "Hard alert, no release." Sarah kept her voice low, professional. "Mr. Donovan is the passenger. Driver's credentials check out, but I need to inspect the vehicle." Donovan's carefully maintained composure showed its first crack. "Inspect, Lieutenant. I assure you there's nothing in that limousine except luggage and event materials. This is becoming embarrassing." Detective Chen positioned herself between Donovan and the vehicle, her badge visible on her belt. "Sir, if there's nothing problematic in the trunk, then this will be resolved quickly. We appreciate your cooperation." The driver had moved to the security barrier as instructed, but his body language suggested he was considering intervening. Hayes caught the movement and shifted position to maintain visual contact with both the driver and Donovan. The tactical arrangement was subtle but effective, creating containment without overt aggression. Sarah moved to the rear of the limousine, Max following at her heel without needing a command. She examined the trunk lid, noting the custom chrome detailing and the manufacturer's emblem. "Mr. Donovan, I need you to authorize the driver to open the trunk." "This is absurd." Donovan's voice had lost some of its smoothness, an edge of genuine anger breaking through. "Do you have any idea how many people are waiting inside? How this looks?" The cameras were fully locked on the scene now, and Sarah could hear reporters speaking urgently into microphones, likely streaming live to evening news broadcasts. The red carpet arrivals behind them had slowed to a crawl, other vehicles backing up as word spread of the security incident. Chen stepped closer to Donovan, her voice carrying quiet authority. "Sir, you can authorize the trunk opening voluntarily, or we can detain the vehicle and obtain a warrant. The first option is faster and less complicated." Donovan's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides before he forcibly relaxed them. The physical tell betrayed his internal calculation, weighing options, considering outcomes, running through scenarios. After a long moment, he nodded curtly to the driver. "Open it." The driver approached with visible reluctance, keys in hand. He inserted the key into the trunk lock, and the mechanism released with a soft click. As he lifted the lid, Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly. Max's alert had not changed, his attention riveted to the opening trunk space. The interior of the trunk appeared normal at first glance. 2 leather garment bags lay across the carpeted floor, expensive luggage with designer labels. A briefcase sat propped against the back wall, its polished surface unmarked. Nothing immediately suspicious, nothing that would explain Max's intense reaction. But the K-9 wasn't looking at the visible contents. His nose was oriented toward the base of the trunk, where the carpeting met the sides. Sarah knelt beside him, trusting his senses over her eyes. She ran her hand along the carpet edge and felt a slight irregularity. The material didn't quite sit flush with the frame. "Hayes, get me a pry tool from the unit." Donovan's voice rose sharply. "Wait just a minute. That's private property. You can't just—" Chen cut him off. "Actually, Mr. Donovan, given the K-9 alert and your vehicle's presence at a secured event, we have probable cause to conduct a thorough inspection. I recommend you let us work." Hayes returned with a slim metal tool designed for precisely this kind of investigation. Sarah inserted the edge beneath the carpet and lifted. The material came up easily, too easily, revealing a false bottom panel secured with quick-release latches. Her stomach tightened as she flipped the latches and removed the panel. Beneath the false floor lay a hidden compartment, and its contents made Sarah's breath catch. Stacks of bundled currency filled the space, shrink-wrapped and organized with military precision. But money alone wouldn't have triggered Max's alert. Nestled among the cash were sealed evidence bags, the kind used by police departments, each containing small plastic packages of white powder. The bags bore official markings, case numbers, date stamps, evidence tags from the Atlanta PD property room. "Jesus Christ," Hayes breathed beside her. Sarah's mind raced through the implications: stolen evidence, police property, drugs that should have been destroyed after court proceedings, and cash that appeared far too organized to be anything legitimate. She straightened slowly, her hand automatically moving to her radio. "Dispatch, this is Collins. I need supervisor response to Checkpoint Alpha immediately. We have a situation requiring command presence." Donovan's face had gone pale, the calculated composure completely shattered. "I don't know what that is. I have no idea how that got there. This is a setup. Someone planted that." Chen was already moving, her weapon drawn but held at low ready. "Mr. Donovan, I need you to place your hands on the vehicle and spread your feet apart." No, I'm not doing that. I'm calling my lawyer right now." Donovan reached for his phone, but Hayes intercepted smoothly, his larger frame blocking the movement. "Sir, you need to comply with Detective Chen's instructions. Right now." The press area had erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, cameras zooming in to capture every second of the unfolding drama. Sarah could see the flashes increasing in frequency, hear the urgent tones of live broadcasts. The story had already escaped containment. Whatever happened next would play out under intense public scrutiny. The driver had backed away from the limousine, his hands raised in a gesture of distance and denial. "I just drive. I don't know anything about what passengers put in the trunk. I just drive." Captain Reeves arrived with remarkable speed, his patrol car pulling up with lights flashing but no siren. He was in his late 50s, a veteran with 3 decades of service and a reputation for navigating political minefields without compromising integrity. As he approached, his eyes took in the scene with practiced assessment: the open trunk, the exposed contraband, the surrounded businessmen, the massed press. "Lieutenant Collins, report." Sarah provided a concise summary, while Chen maintained her position with Donovan. Hayes had moved to secure the driver, separating the two men to prevent any coordination of stories. Max remained at Sarah's side, his alert finally released now that the threat had been exposed and contained. Reeves leaned over the trunk, examining the hidden compartment without touching anything. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated the gravity of the situation had registered fully. When he straightened, his voice carried formal authority. "Mr. Donovan, you're being detained pending investigation. Detective Chen will advise you of your rights. Driver, same applies to you. Officer Hayes, coordinate with evidence collection. Lieutenant Collins, I need you to maintain scene security until forensics arrives." Donovan's shock was transforming into desperate defiance. "This is political persecution. Everyone knows I've been critical of the mayor's development policies. This is revenge for my op-eds in the Journal-Constitution." Reeves didn't engage with the accusation. "You'll have ample opportunity to present your defense. Right now, you need to cooperate with the detention process." As Chen began reading Miranda rights, Sarah noticed movement in the crowd of onlookers. A woman in an elegant evening gown had pushed through to the security barrier, her face a mask of horror as she watched Donovan being handcuffed. Recognition clicked. Vanessa Donovan, Marcus's wife, a prominent attorney who'd made her own name in corporate law before their marriage. "Marcus!" Her voice cut through the chaos. "Don't say anything. Not one word until I get representation here." Donovan met his wife's eyes across the distance, and something passed between them that Sarah couldn't quite read. Fear, certainly, but also calculation. A silent communication that suggested Vanessa's legal instincts had immediately begun strategizing damage control. The evidence collection team arrived in an unmarked van, technicians emerging with cameras and documentation equipment. Sarah briefed the lead technician, a meticulous woman named Rodriguez, who'd worked countless crime scenes with the same methodical precision. Rodriguez photographed the trunk from multiple angles, documented the position of every item, then began the careful process of removing and cataloging the contents. Each evidence bag was photographed individually, the case numbers visible in the frame. Sarah watched as Rodriguez zoomed in on the official markings, making sure every detail was captured. The implications were staggering. These weren't random drugs. They were specific pieces of evidence from closed cases, items that should have been in secure storage or destroyed per protocol. Hayes approached with his tablet. "Lieutenant, I ran the case numbers visible on those evidence bags. 3 of them are from the Morrison drug trafficking case that concluded last year. One's from the Ramirez distribution network takedown. The others are still pulling up, but they're all Atlanta PD property room inventory." Sarah's stomach sank further. The Morrison case had been massive, a multi-agency operation that netted over 50 arrests and seized millions in assets. The fact that evidence from that case was now in Donovan's limousine suggested corruption at a level that would shake the department to its foundation. Reeves had moved to intercept Vanessa Donovan, who was arguing with the officer at the security barrier about accessing her husband. The captain's voice was firm, but not unkind, as he explained that she would need to follow proper procedures to contact her spouse. The conversation was brief and one-sided, Vanessa's legal training apparently recognizing when further argument would be counterproductive. Rodriguez finished documenting the cash next. She counted the bundles methodically, her gloved hands moving with practiced efficiency. Preliminary count puts this at approximately $200,000, all hundreds, sequential serial numbers within each bundle. This is organized money, not street-level collection. The driver was sitting in the back of a patrol car now, his head in his hands. Hayes had separated him from Donovan completely, standard procedure to prevent story coordination. Through the car's window, Sarah could see the man's shoulders, shaking, fear or anger or both. Detective Chen returned after securing Donovan in another patrol car. Her expression was grim. "He lawyered up immediately after Miranda, won't say a word except to demand his attorney. But his body language tells a story. He's terrified and trying not to show it." Sarah glanced toward the red carpet area, where the gala was proceeding despite the drama. Event organizers had managed to redirect incoming vehicles to an alternate entrance, and the flow of arrivals had resumed. But the damage was done. Every news outlet in the city had footage of Marcus Donovan, keynote speaker and prominent philanthropist, being arrested at his own charitable event. Max pressed against Sarah's leg, seeking the physical contact that signaled his transition from working mode to standing down. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, feeling the warmth of his fur and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Without his alert, none of this would have been discovered. The contraband would have passed through security, Donovan would have delivered his speech, and whatever operation this represented would have continued undetected. "Good boy," she murmured. "Very good boy." Reeves approached with his phone in hand. "The chief wants a full briefing within the hour. Internal Affairs is already mobilizing. Those property room case numbers mean we've got a serious leak somewhere in the chain of custody. Lieutenant, I need your incident report prioritized." Sarah nodded. "Understood, sir. Rodriguez has the scene documented. Once she clears the vehicle for towing, I'll head back to write it up." The press is going to be relentless on this. Reeves glanced toward the camera crews, many of which were now doing stand-ups with the patrol cars visible in the background. Public Information Office is preparing a statement, but they're going to want details we can't give them yet. Be prepared for questions. As if on cue, a reporter ducked under the security barrier and jogged toward them, microphone extended. Hayes intercepted before the man got within 10 feet, firmly but professionally redirecting him back to the press area. The reporter shouted questions anyway, his voice barely audible over the competing noise of other journalists doing the same. Rodriguez sealed the last evidence bag and stood, stretching her back after the prolonged crouch. That's everything from the hidden compartment. The garment bags and briefcase up top appear clean, just clothing and event materials as claimed, but I'll process everything at the lab to be thorough. Time estimate on analysis, Sarah asked. Basic presumptive tests I can run tonight. Full chemical analysis and comparison to evidence logs will take a few days. Rodriguez gestured to her team, and they began packing their equipment with the same methodical care they'd shown during collection. The tow truck arrived to impound the limousine, its massive hook gleaming under the security lights that had flickered on as daylight faded completely. The transition from golden hour to artificial illumination had been gradual, but now the scene was bathed in harsh fluorescent white that leached warmth from everything it touched. Sarah watched as the limousine was lifted and secured, thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A routine security check, Max's trained instincts, the small irregularities that might have been missed by human observation alone, and now a cascade of consequences that would ripple through Atlanta's power structure. Hayes rejoined her as the tow truck departed. Driver's story is interesting. Says he's been with the charter service for 3 years, drives for Donovan regularly. Claims he never saw inside the trunk, that Donovan always handled his own luggage personally. Says the last time he opened that trunk was 2 weeks ago for a routine maintenance inspection. Convenient memory, Chen observed, but if he's telling the truth, it means Donovan packed that compartment himself or had direct knowledge of who did. The three of them stood in a rough triangle, the space where the limousine had been now just an empty patch of pavement. The gala continued behind them, music drifting from the convention center along with the murmur of hundreds of conversations. None of those attendees yet knew that their keynote speaker was in custody, that the evening's carefully orchestrated celebration had been built around a man currently facing evidence tampering, possession with intent to distribute, and likely a host of other charges once investigators dug deeper. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor requesting her immediate presence at the precinct. She glanced at Max, who was watching her with patient attention. "Let's go, partner. We've got reports to write." The drive back to the station was quiet. Max settled in his compartment behind the wire partition that separated the rear of her SUV from the front seats. Sarah's mind catalogued details, organizing them into the narrative structure her report would need. Timestamps, observations, actions taken, Max's alert and her response, the discovery sequence. Every detail mattered because every detail would be scrutinized by defense attorneys, internal investigators, and probably a grand jury. The precinct was buzzing with activity when she arrived, word of the arrest having spread through the department with remarkable speed. Officers paused in their work to glance at her as she passed, some offering nods of acknowledgement, others simply staring. Sarah kept her expression neutral and headed straight for her desk. Lieutenant James Morrison from Internal Affairs was waiting in the hallway outside the K-9 unit office. He was in his early 40s, with the lean build of a distance runner and eyes that missed nothing. His reputation preceded him, fair but thorough, impossible to charm or intimidate. "Lieutenant Collins, I need to take your statement while everything's fresh." Sarah nodded. "Let me get Max settled, then I'm all yours." Morrison followed her into the K-9 office, watching as she removed Max's tactical harness and gave him water. The Belgian Malinois drank deeply, then settled onto his cushioned platform with a satisfied exhale. His work was done. Now came the human complications. The interview room Morrison led her to was standard, windowless, sparse, with a table and chairs bolted to the floor. A digital recorder sat in the center of the table, its red light already glowing. Morrison gestured for her to sit, then took the opposite chair. This is a preliminary statement regarding the detention of Marcus Donovan and the seizure of evidence from his vehicle. Lieutenant Collins, please state your full name and badge number for the record. Sarah provided the information, then launched into her account. She described the security checkpoint procedure, the vehicle's approach, Max's alert behavior, her decision to investigate further. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his tablet. When she reached the discovery of the hidden compartment, he held up a hand. Let's focus on the K-9 alert. Describe Max's behavior in detail. How confident were you in his response? Sarah met his eyes directly. Completely confident. Max has 7 years of field experience with an accuracy rate above 90%. His alert was textbook, focused, sustained, no ambiguity. When a K-9 of his training level gives that kind of response, you investigate thoroughly. No possibility of false positive. May be influenced by environmental factors, stress from the crowd, anything that might have compromised his judgment. None. Max alerts on specific scent signatures associated with narcotics. He's been tested quarterly since certification and has never shown reliability issues. His alert was legitimate. Morrison nodded slowly. And when you opened the trunk, what was your immediate observation? The visible contents appeared normal, but the K-9's attention was directed lower, toward the trunk floor. That's when I noticed the carpet wasn't sitting flush with the frame. The discovery of the false bottom followed standard procedure. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, Morrison probing every detail of the sequence. Sarah understood the necessity. Any defense attorney worth their retainer would attack the probable cause for the search, claim improper procedure, argue that Max's alert was insufficient justification. The case would need to be airtight from the first moment of contact. When Morrison finally clicked off the recorder, he leaned back in his chair. Preliminary assessment. Your procedure was flawless. The K-9 alert provides solid probable cause, your response was measured and appropriate, and the chain of evidence is clean. But this is going to get messy, Lieutenant. Marcus Donovan has powerful friends and deep pockets. Expect challenges. Sarah had expected nothing less. I documented everything. Rodriguez's photos will show the discovery sequence clearly. Whatever comes, we followed protocol. Keep that mindset. Morrison stood, gathering his tablet. I'll need follow-up statements from Officer Hayes and Detective Chen, but your part is done for tonight. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense. After Morrison left, Sarah remained in the interview room for a long moment, letting the silence settle. The adrenaline that had carried her through the arrest was fading, leaving behind the particular exhaustion that came after high-stakes incidents. She pulled out her phone and checked the news. The story was everywhere. Video of Donovan being handcuffed played on loop across multiple outlets. Headlines screamed variations of the same theme: prominent businessmen arrested at charity gala, drugs and cash found in Limousine, questions about police corruption and evidence tampering. Some outlets had already dug into Donovan's background, highlighting his vocal criticism of city government and his financial contributions to political causes. The narrative was forming in real time, shaped by partial information and speculation. Sarah returned to the K-9 office and found Max exactly where she'd left him, dozing lightly on his platform. At her entrance, one ear swiveled toward her, but he didn't raise his head. She sat on the floor beside him, running her hand along his flank. You have no idea what you just kicked off, do you, buddy? Max's tail thumped twice against the cushion, his version of acknowledgement without committing to full wakefulness. Sarah smiled, despite her fatigue. For Max, the job was simple. Detect, alert, let the humans handle the complicated stuff. If only her role could be so straightforward. Her phone rang. Captain Reeves. She answered immediately. "Collins, status?" "Just finished with Morrison. Statement is on record. I'm at the precinct with Max." "Good. The chief wants a task force assembled by morning. This isn't just about Donovan. Those evidence bags mean we've got internal problems. I'm putting you on the task force given your role in the discovery. Report to conference room B at 0700. Bring your incident report and be ready to brief." "Understood, sir." "And, Lieutenant, the press is going to be brutal on this. Stay off social media, don't engage with reporters, direct any inquiries to PIO. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." After Reeves disconnected, Sarah pulled up her incident report template and began typing. The details flowed methodically. Times, observations, actions, findings. She included still frames from her body camera, logged Max's certification records, attached Rodriguez's preliminary evidence photos. 2 hours later, she had a comprehensive document that would serve as the foundation for whatever prosecutorial case emerged. It was past midnight when she finally loaded Max into her SUV for the drive home. The night air had cooled considerably, bringing relief from the day's warmth. Atlanta's skyline glittered in the distance. Towers of glass and steel that represented the same concentration of power and money that had produced Marcus Donovan. Sarah's apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom unit in a quiet complex 15 minutes from the precinct. Max had his own space in the 2nd bedroom, outfitted with his sleeping platform, toys, and grooming supplies. As soon as they entered, he headed straight for his water bowl, lapping noisily before collapsing onto his platform with a satisfied groan. Sarah stood in her kitchen, eating cold leftovers directly from containers while reviewing her phone. The news cycle hadn't slowed. Political commentators were already speculating about conspiracy theories, corruption rings, and potential involvement of other public figures. Donovan's attorney had released a brief statement proclaiming his client's innocence and characterizing the arrest as harassment. Vanessa Donovan had remained silent, her social media accounts going dark. Sleep came fitfully when Sarah finally surrendered to exhaustion. Her dreams were fragmented, flashing cameras, hidden compartments opening endlessly, Max alerting to threats that materialized and dissolved. She woke at 5:30 to her alarm, feeling like she'd barely rested at all. The morning briefing was crowded. Captain Reeves had assembled representatives from multiple departments: narcotics, internal affairs, organized crime, the district attorney's office. Sarah recognized faces but didn't know all the names. This was a cross-functional task force being stood up with unusual speed. Lieutenant Morrison opened the presentation, his voice carrying crisp authority. At approximately 17:45 yesterday, Lieutenant Collins and K-9 Max conducted a security check on a limousine at the Georgia World Congress Center. The vehicle belonged to Marcus Donovan, CEO of Donovan Development Corporation. Following a positive K-9 alert, a search revealed a hidden compartment containing approximately $200,000 in organized currency and 12 evidence bags containing suspected narcotics. The evidence bags bear Atlanta PD property room markings and case numbers from closed investigations. Morrison clicked through photos on the screen, showing the discovery sequence. The images were damning: the false bottom, the neat rows of cash, the official evidence bags with their unmistakable tags. Preliminary analysis confirms the substances are cocaine, high purity. The case numbers trace back to 5 separate investigations conducted between 18 months and 3 years ago. All of those cases resulted in convictions. All of the evidence should have been destroyed per protocol following final appeals, exhaustion. A prosecutor from the DA's office leaned forward. Are we saying someone inside property room management was systematically diverting evidence? That's one theory, Morrison replied. Another is that the diversion happened at multiple points in the chain of custody, during booking, during transfer, during storage. We're auditing records for all 5 cases, interviewing every officer and clerk who had access. This will take time. Detective Frank Hayes from Narcotics raised his hand. What's Donovan's connection to these cases? Was his company involved in any of the investigations? Not directly, Morrison said. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 of the 5 cases involved properties scheduled for demolition and redevelopment. 2 of those properties were acquired by Donovan Development within months of the evidence seizures. We're looking at whether there's a pattern, drugs being moved through properties, evidence being diverted before demolition destroys crime scenes, and Donovan profiting from the real estate transactions. Sarah absorbed the information, her mind connecting dots. If Donovan was involved in a scheme to profit from drug-contaminated properties, he'd need inside information about police investigations, access to evidence that could link him to illegal activity, and the ability to move product without detection. The hidden compartment suggested sophisticated planning, not improvised criminality. Captain Reeves took over the briefing. Here's the task force structure. Morrison leads internal investigation. Hayes coordinates with narcotics on the drug angle. Chen handles financial crimes. Track the money, find the sources. Collins, you and Max are on standby for any additional searches or evidence recovery. Everyone reports daily at 0700 until we have clarity. The meeting continued for another hour, assignments distributed and protocols established. Sarah noted the tension in the room. Nobody enjoyed investigating their own department, but the evidence demanded it. Somewhere in the chain of custody, trust had been violated. Finding the breach was now paramount. As the briefing concluded, Detective Chen caught Sarah in the hallway. I need to talk to you about something. Privately. They found an empty office, Chen closing the door with care. Her expression was troubled. I've been digging into Donovan's finances. The man's company is leveraged to the breaking point. Massive debt. Cash flow problems. Projects stalled due to cost overruns. He's been projecting strength publicly while scrambling privately. 3 months ago, he took out a high-interest loan from a private equity firm with ties to organized crime. Sarah frowned. So he's desperate for cash. That explains the money in the trunk, but not the evidence bags. Right. Unless the evidence isn't about drugs, it's about leverage. Chen pulled up files on her tablet. What if those evidence bags represent insurance? Proof that he can implicate others if he goes down? Or proof of compromised investigations that someone else once kept quiet? The theory had merit. Sarah thought about Donovan's immediate reaction to discovery, not just fear, but calculation. His lawyer-up response suggested someone who'd prepared for potential exposure. Who's he protecting? Sarah asked. Or who's protecting him? That's what I need to find out, but it means this goes deeper than one corrupt businessman. We might be looking at a network. The implications settled between them like a weight. If Donovan was part of a larger operation, then his arrest might trigger cascading reactions, other players moving to cover exposure, evidence being destroyed, witnesses disappearing. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Officer Hayes, check Channel 7. She pulled up the local news stream on her phone. A press conference was underway, Vanessa Donovan standing at a podium flanked by a legal team. Her expression was composed but fierce, her voice carrying controlled anger. My husband is the victim of selective prosecution and police misconduct. Marcus Donovan has been a vocal critic of corruption in city government, and this arrest represents retaliation for his advocacy. We have evidence that the so-called discovery in his vehicle was planted by officers seeking to silence his voice. We will be filing motions to dismiss all charges and pursuing civil action against the Atlanta Police Department for false arrest and defamation." Sarah's stomach clenched. The counterattack had begun, and it was aggressive. Claiming planted evidence meant attacking her credibility, Max's reliability, the entire chain of custody. It was a desperate move. But with sufficient resources and skilled attorneys, desperate moves could create reasonable doubt. Chen watched the press conference with a grim expression. "She's going nuclear. This isn't just defense. This is scorched earth." "She's a corporate attorney," Sarah said. "She knows how to fight in court and in public opinion simultaneously. We need our case absolutely airtight." The task force reconvened that afternoon for an emergency session. Vanessa Donovan's accusations were on everyone's mind, and Captain Reeves addressed them directly. "Here's what we know. Body camera footage from Lieutenant Collins shows the entire sequence from initial contact to discovery. Rodriguez's documentation provides a complete chain of evidence. Max's certification records demonstrate reliability. We have multiple officers as witnesses. The defense will attack anyway, but we have solid ground." Morrison added his assessment. "The planted evidence claim is weak. The timing doesn't support it. The vehicle was under observation from approach to search. The logistics of planting would require conspiracy among multiple officers, which we can demonstrate didn't happen. This is a Hail Mary defense strategy." Over the following days, the investigation expanded exponentially. Internal Affairs interviewed every officer who'd had access to the evidence room during the relevant time periods. Financial analysts traced the serial numbers on the currency. Discovering it had been withdrawn from multiple banks in structured amounts designed to avoid reporting thresholds. Forensic accountants mapped Donovan's business dealings, uncovering a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Sarah continued her regular duties with the K-9 unit, but the Donovan case remained ever present. News coverage was relentless, with new revelations emerging daily. 3 property room clerks were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. A sergeant in narcotics retired abruptly, citing personal reasons. The department's reputation took hit after hit as the scope of potential corruption expanded. Max seemed oblivious to the chaos his alert had triggered. He worked his regular shifts, maintaining his usual performance standards. Sarah envied his ability to compartmentalize, to remain focused on immediate tasks without getting lost in the larger implications. 2 weeks after the initial arrest, the task force received a break. One of the property room clerks, facing termination and potential prosecution, requested immunity in exchange for testimony. In a recorded statement, she described systematic evidence diversion orchestrated by a senior evidence custodian who'd since retired. The scheme had operated for at least 3 years, with diverted evidence being sold to parties who paid premium prices for officially documented product. The retired custodian was arrested attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica. In his carry-on luggage, investigators found a laptop containing encrypted files that, once cracked, revealed communications with Marcus Donovan spanning 18 months. The messages discussed specific evidence bags, pickup arrangements, and payment schedules. Donovan had been a customer, not the mastermind, but a willing and knowing participant in the scheme. The discovery shifted the case's trajectory. Donovan's defense strategy of claiming planted evidence collapsed in the face of his own documented communications. His attorneys pivoted to negotiating a plea deal, seeking reduced charges in exchange for testimony about other participants in the evidence diversion network. Sarah learned about the plea discussions during a task force briefing. Morrison seemed satisfied but not celebratory. Donovan's rolling on his co-conspirators. We're looking at additional arrests, 2 more property room employees, a private investigator who facilitated exchanges, and possibly a deputy in the sheriff's office who provided advance notice of evidence destruction schedules. This thing branched further than we initially suspected. Captain Reeves nodded. The important thing is we caught it. Lieutenant Collins, your work at that checkpoint prevented this from continuing indefinitely. The department owes you and Max recognition. Sarah felt uncomfortable with praise given the circumstances. I was doing my job, sir. Max did his job, that's all. That's enough, Reeves said. Sometimes doing your job well changes everything. Indeed. The formal recognition came during a ceremony 3 weeks later. The chief presented Sarah with a commendation for exemplary service, and Max received the department's award for valor, a rare honor for K-9 units. The press coverage was extensive, a sharp contrast to the earlier negative narratives. The story had shifted from potential corruption to successful interdiction, from department failure to individual excellence. Sarah stood at the podium with Max beside her, facing cameras and assembled officers. She kept her remarks brief. This recognition belongs to every officer who maintains standards, even when it's difficult, to every investigator who follows evidence wherever it leads, to every K-9 who alerts on threats we can't see. Integrity isn't glamorous, but it's essential. Thank you. The applause was genuine, a release of tension that had built over weeks of investigation and revelation. As Sarah left the podium, several officers approached to offer congratulations. Detective Chen was among them. I finished the financial analysis, Chen said quietly. The money in Donovan's trunk. It came from his business accounts. He was moving cash to offshore locations, probably preparing to flee if things went bad. He knew he was operating on borrowed time. Sarah nodded. The pieces had finally assembled into a complete picture. Donovan had been desperate, drowning in debt, making increasingly reckless decisions. The evidence diversion scheme had offered quick money and the illusion of control, but his criticism of city government hadn't been principled advocacy. It had been misdirection, creating noise to distract from his own criminality. Max pressed against her leg, seeking attention. Sarah reached down to scratch his ears, feeling the familiar warmth and solidity of his presence. He'd done exactly what he was trained to do, alerting to a threat without understanding the human complexities that would follow. For him, justice was simple: detect, alert, protect. The complications were humanity's burden. The civil suit Vanessa Donovan had threatened never materialized. With her husband's plea deal and the overwhelming evidence of guilt, pursuing false arrest claims would have been pointless. She filed for divorce 2 months after his conviction, released a statement about betrayal and disillusionment, then disappeared from public life. Marcus Donovan received 7 years in federal prison for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and drug possession with intent to distribute. The sentence was lighter than it might have been given his cooperation, but it effectively destroyed his business empire and reputation. Donovan Development Corporation filed for bankruptcy, its assets liquidated to pay creditors. The properties he'd acquired were sold at auction, some to legitimate developers, others remaining vacant as litigation over their histories dragged on. The internal investigation concluded with 8 department employees facing discipline, ranging from termination to criminal charges. The evidence room underwent complete reorganization with new protocols for access, documentation, and destruction. The scandal had exposed systemic weaknesses, and the reforms that followed were comprehensive. Sarah returned to regular duties with the K-9 unit, grateful for the routine. She worked security details, conducted training exercises, responded to call-outs. Max performed consistently, his reliability never wavering. The Donovan case became part of their history, a significant incident among many. but not defining their entire purpose. 6 months after the arrest, Sarah attended a community outreach event at a local high school. The K-9 unit was conducting demonstrations, showing students how police dogs detected drugs and tracked suspects. Max worked through his paces with professional precision, and the students watched with fascination. During a break, a teenage girl approached Sarah. She was maybe 16, with nervous energy and intelligent eyes. "I saw the news about you and Max, about catching that businessman with the drugs and money." Sarah nodded. "That was us. My mum's a teacher. She always says integrity matters more than success, that you have to do right even when nobody's watching." The girl paused, gathering courage. "I want to be a cop someday, like you, someone who does right." Sarah felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. She'd been so focused on procedures, investigations, and protocols that she'd forgotten the larger impact of simply doing the job well. "Then do it," Sarah said. "Study hard, stay focused, remember why you want to serve. The work isn't always glamorous, and sometimes it's really hard, but it matters. It really matters." The girl smiled, thanked her, and rejoined her classmates. Sarah watched her go, thinking about paths and choices and the thousands of small decisions that accumulated into careers and lives. Max nudged her hand, ready to resume the demonstration. Sarah attached his lead and walked back to the center of the gymnasium, where the next group of students waited eagerly. As Max moved through his detection routine, Sarah noticed their faces, the wonder, the respect, the budding interest in service careers. This was the other side of the job, not just arrests and investigations, but inspiration, not just catching criminals, but demonstrating that standards mattered, that discipline and training produced results, that one alert dog and one attentive handler could change outcomes. The demonstration concluded to enthusiastic applause. Sarah fielded questions about training, career paths, and the partnership between human and K-9. Max basked in the attention, accepting gentle pets from students who approached with appropriate caution and respect. As they loaded into the SUV for the drive back to the precinct, Sarah reflected on the 6 months since that evening at the Georgia World Congress Center. The Donovan case had been resolved, justice served imperfectly but genuinely. The department had been wounded but had responded with reform. And she and Max continued their work, alert to threats, committed to standards, present in the moments that demanded attention and action. The city passed by her windows as she drove, neighborhoods and businesses, landmarks and anonymous streets. Somewhere in this urban landscape, other criminals were planning, other schemes were developing, other threats were emerging, and somewhere other officers were preparing to respond, to investigate, to hold the line between order and chaos. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror at Max, settled comfortably in his compartment, already dozing after the morning's exertions. His simple dedication to duty provided a model worth emulating. Work with excellence, trust your training, alert without hesitation when danger appears. That's what she'd done at the checkpoint. Alert without hesitation. Everything that followed was consequence, but the initial moment had been pure. Dog alerts, handler investigates, truth emerges. The complexity came afterward, but the foundation remained simple. As Sarah pulled into the precinct parking lot, she made a mental note to schedule Max's quarterly certification evaluation. Maintaining standards was continuous work, not a destination. The Donovan case had proved that excellence mattered, but excellence required constant attention, regular assessment, and commitment to improvement. She opened Max's compartment, and he jumped down with easy athleticism. Together, they walked into the building, ready for whatever came next. The work continued. The city needed protection, and she and Max would provide it, one alert at a time, one investigation at a time, one small moment of integrity at a time. That was the job. That was enough. The following morning brought a new development. Captain Reeves called Sarah to the federal building. The FBI wanted to discuss the Donovan case. They'd been running a parallel investigation Sarah's department wasn't aware of. At the federal building, Special Agent Catherine Morrison and her partner, Agent David Chen, explained their 14-month investigation into money laundering and drug distribution networks across the Southeast. Sarah's arrest had disrupted their timeline, but provided evidence they couldn't obtain through conventional means. Morrison showed Sarah a network diagram on her laptop screen, dozens of names connected by lines, with Donovan's name near the center. He was a critical link. His development company provided legitimate infrastructure for moving money. His real estate transactions created opportunities for product storage, and his political connections gave the network advance warning about enforcement. The implications were staggering. Morrison confirmed evidence suggesting information leaks from multiple department levels: patrol, detectives, possibly command staff. Agent Chen pulled up financial transactions. We've traced payments to 7 law enforcement officers so far, small amounts $5,000 to $10,000, just enough to compromise judgment to buy silence on specific matters. Sarah's stomach tightened. Who are the 7? We can't share that yet, Morrison said, but none are in your immediate chain of command. The interview consumed 3 hours. Morrison and Chen probed every detail of the arrest, seeking connections Sarah might not have recognized as significant. When they finally released her, Sarah felt mentally exhausted. Max was at the precinct's K-9 facility. Sarah drove there, needing his uncomplicated presence. The training officer reported Max had performed excellently during the day's exercises. Sarah took him home early, both of them needing downtime. That evening, Detective Chen called requesting a meeting at a public coffee shop. When they met, Chen revealed the FBI had vetted all task force members, checking for compromise. They asked about you specifically: your finances, relationships, vulnerabilities. Did they clear you? Sarah asked. Must have, or we wouldn't be talking. But it shows how deep they think this goes. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the coffee shop flowing around them, conversations, espresso machines, the clink of cups, normal life continuing while they discussed the dissolution of institutional trust. Outside the window, Atlanta's evening traffic moved in steady streams, people returning home from work, unaware of the corruption being unearthed within their police department. Morrison told me there might be command staff involved, Sarah said quietly. How do we investigate our own leadership without creating chaos? Very carefully, Chen replied. The feds will take the lead on the higher-level targets. Our job is to keep working the evidence, building the foundation. When arrests come, they'll be coordinated and comprehensive, but until then, we operate as if everything's normal. While suspecting nothing is normal. Exactly. Chen finished her coffee and stood. Stay sharp, Collins, and watch your back. We don't know who might feel threatened by this investigation. Sarah returned home and tried to relax, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept thinking about the network diagram Morrison had shown, all those connections radiating from Donovan. Somewhere in that web were people she worked with, people she'd trusted. The uncertainty was corrosive, eating away at the professional relationships that made effective policing possible. Max seemed to sense her unease. He stayed close throughout the evening, his physical presence a grounding force. Sarah found herself talking to him, voicing concerns she couldn't share with human colleagues. It's easier for you, isn't it? You don't have to wonder if your partner's corrupt. You just trust me because I've never given you reason not to. Humans make it so much more complicated. Max regarded her with patient attention, his brown eyes reflecting the apartment's warm lighting. Sarah smiled despite everything. His world was simpler, his loyalties uncomplicated. She envied that clarity, even as she valued the complexity of human relationships and moral reasoning. The next 2 weeks brought a strange normalcy to the investigation. The task force continued meeting daily, reviewing evidence, coordinating with federal agents who remained largely in the background. Arrests were made in the property room scheme, guilty pleas were entered, sentences were handed down. To outside observers, the case was progressing toward resolution. The media coverage began to fade as newer stories captured attention, though investigative reporters continued following leads about the broader implications. But Sarah knew the reality. The visible prosecutions were just surface layer, the obvious corruption being excised while the deeper investigation continued quietly. The FBI was building cases against the regional network, tracing money flows, documenting communications, identifying all the participants. When they moved, it would be decisive and comprehensive. The patience required was frustrating. But Sarah understood the necessity of thorough preparation. In the meantime, Sarah returned to regular duties. She worked patrol shifts, conducted K-9 demonstrations, trained with Max to maintain their certification standards. The routine was comforting, a return to the fundamental work that had drawn her to law enforcement. Each shift brought its own challenges and rewards: traffic stops that yielded contraband, building searches that cleared potential threats, community interactions that built trust between residents and police. The daily work continued regardless of the larger investigation unfolding behind the scenes. One afternoon, while conducting a vehicle search during a traffic stop, Max alerted on a hidden compartment similar to the one in Donovan's limousine. Sarah's pulse quickened with recognition. The driver had constructed a false floor in his trunk, concealing packaged narcotics and bundled cash. The arrest was straightforward, but Sarah couldn't help wondering if this was connected to the larger network, if she'd just intercepted another link in the chain. Captain Reeves thought so. When Sarah briefed him on the traffic stop, he immediately called in the task force. Within hours, detectives were interviewing the driver, tracing the vehicle's ownership, analyzing the cash for connections to known distribution operations. The driver, a 28-year-old with minor priors, initially refused to cooperate. But when presented with evidence linking his phone records to known associates of the Donovan network, his resistance crumbled. He provided information about pickup locations, delivery schedules, and the individuals who coordinated the logistics. Another thread, another connection, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Agent Morrison contacted Sarah after the interview. "Your K-9 just gave us a direct link to the distribution arm. The driver was moving product from staging areas in Donovan's old properties to street-level dealers. This confirms our theory about how the network operated." "Is this enough to move on the larger targets?" Sarah asked. "Getting closer. We need to lock down communications evidence, which means warrant execution on multiple locations simultaneously. We're coordinating with DEA and state authorities, probably looking at 3 to 4 weeks before we're ready." The waiting was difficult. Sarah continued her work, knowing that somewhere in the department compromised officers were watching, probably aware that an investigation was ongoing but unsure of its scope or timeline. The uncertainty had to be creating pressure, pushing some toward panic decisions. 3 weeks after the traffic stop, Sarah was called to another federal meeting. This time, the conference room was crowded. FBI agents, DEA representatives, Georgia Bureau of Investigation officers, and U.S. attorneys. The operation Morrison had mentioned was moving to execution phase. Morrison stood at the front of the room, commanding attention. "Tomorrow at 0600, we execute simultaneous warrants on 43 locations across 4 states. The targets include residences, businesses, storage facilities, and law enforcement officers suspected of participation in the network. Atlanta PD will provide support personnel for local warrants, but federal agents will make the actual entries to avoid compromising the operation." She clicked through a presentation showing photographs and addresses. Sarah recognized several locations, properties that had been connected to Donovan's development company, addresses that had appeared in case files, businesses that had seemed legitimate but were actually fronts. Then Morrison reached a slide that made Sarah's stomach clench. Photographs of 7 individuals, all wearing Atlanta PD uniforms. 3 were patrol officers Sarah had worked with occasionally. 2 were detectives from different units. 1 was a sergeant she'd met at department functions, and the last was a lieutenant she'd served with on a previous task force. These 7 officers will be arrested simultaneously with the civilian targets, Morrison said. They're charged with various combinations of bribery, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. Their arrests will happen at their homes before shift starts, minimizing the chance of department-wide alert. The room was silent. Sarah looked around at other Atlanta PD officers present and saw her own shock reflected in their faces. Knowing abstractly that colleagues were compromised was different from seeing their photographs, from confronting the specific betrayal. After the briefing, Captain Reeves pulled Sarah aside. "The chief wants you and Max on standby tomorrow. If any of the warrant executions require K-9 support, you'll be called. Otherwise, stay available but out of the direct operation." Sarah spent the evening in restless preparation, checking equipment, reviewing procedures, trying to occupy her mind with mechanical tasks. Max sensed the tension and remained close, his calm presence a counterweight to her anxiety. Sleep was impossible. Sarah lay awake, thinking about the officers who would be arrested in the morning. People she'd trusted, even if not closely, people who'd taken oaths and then violated them for money. The betrayal felt personal, a corruption of the shared purpose that should have unified the department. At 5:30, she gave up on sleep and took Max for a walk through her neighborhood. The pre-dawn darkness was quiet, just scattered lights and empty streets. Somewhere across the city, federal agents were taking positions, preparing to execute the operation that would reshape the department. Her radio crackled at 5:55. "All units, stand by. Operation Crossroads is executing in 5 minutes." Sarah stopped walking, listening to the radio traffic as teams confirmed their positions. At precisely 6 o'clock, the operation began. The radio came alive with status updates, warrants being served, entries being made, arrests being executed. The coordination was impressive. Dozens of locations hit simultaneously with military precision. Within 20 minutes, preliminary reports confirmed 38 arrests, including all 7 targeted Atlanta PD officers. 5 additional suspects were in the wind, but their identification and warrants meant they couldn't return to normal life. They were fugitives now, cut off from support networks. Sarah waited for the call to deploy Max, but it never came. The operation had been so carefully planned that K-9 support wasn't needed. She felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. After months of investigation stemming from her initial checkpoint discovery, she was now a spectator to the culmination. Captain Reeves called at 7:30. "It's done. All our targets are in custody. The chief is holding a press conference at 9. He wants you there. You're part of the story about how this started." The press conference was held at police headquarters, in the main briefing room that could accommodate the crush of reporters certain to attend. Sarah arrived early and found herself surrounded by brass, the chief, deputy chiefs, commanders from multiple units. The atmosphere was grim despite the operational success. 7 of their own had been arrested. The department's integrity had been compromised. This was victory, but it tasted like ashes. Chief Robert Andrews was in his early 60s, a career officer with a reputation for zero tolerance for corruption. He looked exhausted as he approached the podium, his face lined with the stress of the past months. This morning, in coordination with federal and state partners, The Atlanta Police Department participated in Operation Crossroads, a major enforcement action against a criminal network operating across the Southeast. 43 arrests were made, dismantling an organization responsible for large-scale drug distribution, money laundering, and corruption of public officials. Andrews paused, his expression hardening. 7 of those arrested were Atlanta police officers. These individuals betrayed their oaths, betrayed their colleagues, and betrayed the community they were sworn to protect. Their arrests represent the department's commitment to accountability. No one is above the law, and we will root out corruption wherever we find it. He went on to describe the investigation, carefully crediting federal partners while acknowledging the work of the internal task force. When he mentioned the initial discovery that had sparked the investigation, he gestured toward Sarah. The break in this case came from exemplary police work by Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max during a routine security check. Their diligence and adherence to protocol prevented a crime in progress and provided the evidence foundation for everything that followed. This is what proper law enforcement looks like. Officers doing their jobs with excellence and integrity. Reporters erupted with questions, and Andrews fielded them with practiced skill. He refused to discuss specific evidence, citing ongoing prosecutions. He wouldn't name the arrested officers beyond confirming their ranks. He acknowledged that trust in the department had been damaged, but insisted that the aggressive response to corruption demonstrated institutional health, not systemic failure. After the press conference, Sarah was surrounded by reporters seeking individual comments. She kept her responses brief and professional, deflecting credit to the larger team and emphasizing that she'd simply followed standard procedures. But the narrative being constructed was clear. She was the hero cop who'd triggered the investigation, the conscientious officer who'd held the line while others fell. The attention was uncomfortable. Sarah didn't see herself as heroic. She'd conducted a vehicle search, found contraband, and reported it. Max had done the actual detecting. Everything that followed was just investigative work, the grinding process of connecting evidence and building cases. But public narratives required heroes, and she'd been cast in that role. Over the following weeks, the scope of the network's operations became public knowledge through court filings and prosecutorial statements. Donovan's organization had moved an estimated $20 million in illegal proceeds over 3 years. The compromised evidence from Atlanta PD had allowed the network to operate with relative impunity, advance warning of enforcement activity, giving them time to adjust operations or move product. The 7 arrested officers faced varying charges and outcomes. 3 accepted plea deals quickly, providing testimony against higher-level targets in the network. 2 went to trial and were convicted. 1 was acquitted on technical grounds, though he resigned from the department immediately. The last remained in legal limbo, his attorney fighting extradition issues related to evidence obtained in another state. Marcus Donovan's sentence was extended after prosecutors filed additional charges based on evidence obtained during Operation Crossroads. His cooperation had earned him some consideration, but the full scope of his involvement became clear. He'd been more than a customer or facilitator. He'd been an active participant in planning and logistics, a key node in the network's infrastructure. For Sarah, life gradually returned to normal rhythms. The media attention faded as news stories captured public interest. The department underwent mandated reforms, enhanced oversight of evidence handling, revised protocols for internal communications, expanded training on corruption recognition and reporting. The wounds would take time to heal, but the institution was adapting. 6 months after Operation Crossroads, Sarah attended a memorial service for a K-9 officer who died of cancer. The ceremony drew officers from across the state, a gathering of the law enforcement community to honor a 4-legged member who'd served with distinction. Sarah stood with Max among her fellow K-9 handlers, listening to eulogies that celebrated loyalty, dedication, and the special bond between officers and their partners. After the service, she lingered at the memorial wall, where the names of fallen officers were inscribed. Generations of sacrifice preserved in metal and stone, a reminder that the work continued across time. Some of those names represented her profession's highest ideals. Others might have fallen short of those ideals in ways not recorded on the memorial. The institution was human, therefore flawed, but the aspiration towards service remained valid. Max pressed against her leg, patient and present. Sarah looked down at him, this Belgian Malinois who'd changed the trajectory of a major investigation with a simple alert. He returned her gaze with brown eyes that held no agenda beyond duty and partnership. "You started something big, buddy," she said quietly. "Changed a lot of lives." Max's tail wagged once, twice. His world remained simple. Work, rest, play. The uncomplicated relationship with his handler, the human complexities of corruption and investigation and prosecution existed beyond his concern. He'd done his job at that security checkpoint. Everything else was consequence. Sarah drove back to the precinct, Max dozing in his compartment behind her. The city passed by her windows, familiar and ever-changing. Somewhere in this urban landscape, new crimes were being planned, new challenges were emerging, new threats were developing. And throughout the department, officers were preparing their responses, most with integrity, a few without. The eternal struggle between order and chaos, between service and selfishness. The following week brought another high-profile event requiring K-9 security, a political convention at the same Georgia World Congress Center where the Donovan arrest had occurred. Sarah felt a strange symmetry as she and Max took position at the security checkpoint, watching limousines approach in the evening light. The procedures were the same: credentials check, K-9 sweep, clearance or alert. The work continued, the wheel turning through another cycle. But Sarah was more watchful now, more aware of the hidden compartments that could exist in vehicles and in people. The Donovan case had taught her that surfaces could deceive, that legitimacy could mask criminality, that trust required verification. Max worked with his usual precision, checking each vehicle methodically. No alerts, just routine clearances. The event proceeded without incident, another successful security operation in the city's endless schedule of gatherings and celebrations. As the last vehicle cleared and the checkpoint secured for the night, Captain Reeves approached. "Clean operation, Lieutenant. No drama." "That's how I prefer it, sir." Reeves smiled slightly. "I know the Donovan thing made you a minor celebrity. Requests for interviews, speaking invitations, all that attention. You've handled it well, stayed focused on the work." "The work is what matters." "It is," Reeves agreed. "But sometimes the work creates ripples that matter too. That investigation didn't just take down a criminal network. It sent a message about standards, about accountability. Young officers are watching. They're learning that excellence gets recognized, that integrity matters, that doing your job right can change things." Sarah thought about the teenage girl at the high school, the one who'd said she wanted to be a cop like Sarah. How many others might have been influenced by the story, might have seen that standing firm on principles produced outcomes worth pursuing. "I hope they learn that," Sarah said. "I hope they see it's not about glory or recognition. It's about showing up, doing the work, maintaining standards even when nobody's watching." "That's the message," Reeves said, "and you and Max delivered it perfectly." After Reeves departed, Sarah remained at the checkpoint for a moment, looking at the convention center's illuminated facade. This building had been the site of her most significant case. The place where a routine security check had cascaded into months of investigation and institutional change. But it was also just a building. just another venue in a city full of places where police work happened daily. She loaded Max into the SUV and began the drive home. Her radio was quiet, the evening shift winding down without major incidents. The city seemed peaceful from her vantage point, though Sarah knew that peace was always partial, always temporary. Somewhere crimes were occurring, somewhere officers were responding. The work never truly stopped, it just shifted between different hands across different shifts. Max stirred in his compartment, stretching before settling back into his rest position. 7 years of partnership, thousands of calls, hundreds of searches, countless hours of training and working, and simply existing side by side. Their bond had been tested and proven through the biggest case of Sarah's career. Whatever came next, she knew they'd face it together. At home, Sarah went through her evening routine. Equipment maintenance, report review, preparing for the next day's shift. Max ate his dinner, played briefly with his favorite toy, then settled onto his platform with a contented sigh. The domestic normalcy was grounding after months of intensity. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen. The message was brief. Media reporting that 3 of Donovan's plea deal targets accepted their own deals. Network collapse is cascading. Good work, Collins. Sarah typed a response. Team effort. We all pushed the right pieces. But she knew Chen's point. The initial alert, the checkpoint discovery, had been the catalyst. Everything that followed had been possible because she'd trusted Max's instincts and followed procedure without cutting corners. Small moments, properly handled, could generate extraordinary outcomes. She thought about writing a response that articulated this realization, but Chen probably already understood. Instead, Sarah simply added, Max deserves the credit. I just backed him up. Chen's reply came quickly. That's what good partners do. Sarah smiled at that. True partnership, human to human, human to K-9, was about trust and support. Max trusted her to respond appropriately to his alerts. She trusted him to detect threats her human senses missed. Together, they formed a unit more capable than either would be alone. The next morning brought rain, steady and soaking, transforming Atlanta's streets into rivers of reflected light. Sarah drove carefully to the precinct, Max alert in his compartment behind her. The weather would affect their work. Scent detection was more challenging in rain, requiring Max to work harder to process information. But they'd trained for these conditions, and Max's skills remained reliable regardless of climate. The shift briefing included assignments for the day, patrol sectors, traffic enforcement priorities, follow-up investigations from previous incidents. Sarah and Max were assigned to a neighborhood experiencing increased drug activity, their presence intended as both deterrent and enforcement tool. They spent the morning conducting high-visibility patrols, the marked K-9 unit serving as a message to dealers and users that law enforcement was active and attentive. Between patrols, Sarah conducted foot searches of areas known for drug transactions, alleyways, abandoned buildings, parks where dealers might stash product. Max alerted twice, both times discovering small quantities of drugs concealed in hiding spots. The amounts were minor, street-level dealer stashes rather than major caches, but each discovery represented a small victory, product removed from circulation, a dealer's supply interrupted. The work wasn't glamorous or headline-generating, it was simply police work, the daily grind of enforcement. At lunch, Sarah sat in her SUV eating a sandwich while Max rested in his compartment. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, grey clouds hanging low over the city. Her phone showed news alerts about the Donovan case, another arrest, another plea deal. The network continuing to disintegrate as pressure from multiple prosecutions forced participants to cooperate. The story had developed its own momentum now, independent of Sarah's involvement. Journalists had dug into the network's history, revealing connections to other criminal organizations, documenting the flow of drugs and money across state lines. Academic researchers were analyzing the corruption angle, examining how institutional failures had allowed the network to flourish. Documentary producers had approached Sarah about participation in a film project exploring the case. She declined all such requests. The story was still unfolding through legal proceedings, and her participation felt inappropriate while prosecutions were pending. But more fundamentally, Sarah was uncomfortable with the glorification of what had been, from her perspective, simply proper procedure. She'd done her job. That shouldn't be extraordinary enough to warrant documentary treatment, yet she understood why others saw it differently. In an era when institutional trust was eroding, when police misconduct dominated headlines, a story about good police work leading to accountability for bad police work offered something the public needed. Evidence that the system could self-correct, that integrity still mattered within law enforcement. The afternoon brought a call-out to assist a narcotics unit conducting a warrant execution. Sarah and Max arrived at the location, a house in a residential neighborhood that looked entirely ordinary from the exterior. The tactical team had already made entry and secured the occupants. Sarah's role was to conduct a K-9 sweep of the premises, searching for hidden contraband that might have been overlooked during the initial clearing. Max worked systematically through the house, checking rooms, closets, furniture. In the basement, he alerted on a section of wall that appeared solid. Sarah called for the tactical team, and they used tools to open the wall, revealing a hidden space packed with shrink-wrapped cocaine blocks and bundles of currency. The homeowner claimed ignorance, but the discovery of sophisticated concealment suggested knowledge and planning. The seizure was significant. Street value estimated at over $100,000, enough to warrant federal charges. Sarah documented her portion of the search while narcotics detectives processed the scene. Another successful operation, another example of K-9 capability producing results. By the time her shift ended, Sarah had been on duty for 11 hours. The rain had resumed, heavier now, drumming on the SUV's roof as she drove home. Max was tired but satisfied, having worked hard throughout the day. Sarah felt the same fatigue and satisfaction. They'd done good work, contributed to the department's mission, upheld the standards that defined professional policing. At home, she allowed herself the luxury of a long shower, letting hot water wash away the day's exertion. Max was already asleep on his platform when she emerged, his breathing deep and even. Sarah envied his ability to simply switch off, to transition from work mode to rest mode without the mental processing that humans seem compelled to perform. She tried to follow his example, climbing into bed and willing herself towards sleep, but her mind kept returning to the basement discovery, to the hidden wall space and the contraband it contained. How many other houses in Atlanta concealed similar secrets? How many seemingly ordinary locations masked criminal activity? The Donovan case had revealed one network, but Sarah knew others existed, always would exist. The work of detecting and disrupting them would continue indefinitely. Eventually, exhaustion overcame contemplation, and Sarah drifted into sleep. Her dreams were fragmented and unmemorable, just shadows and voices that dissolved upon waking. The alarm came too soon, pulling her back to consciousness and the beginning of another shift. The pattern repeated. Days of routine punctuated by moments of intensity, weeks of standard police work building toward occasional significant cases. The Donovan investigation continued its slow progress through the legal system, each defendant's case moving at its own pace through hearings, motions, and trials. Sarah was called to testify twice. Her account of the initial discovery scrutinized by defense attorneys, seeking any procedural flaw that might invalidate the search. Both times, her testimony held up. The body camera footage, Rodriguez's documentation, Max's certification records. The evidence foundation was solid. The defense attacks were vigorous but ultimately unsuccessful. Convictions followed, sentences were handed down, and the network's participants were gradually removed from circulation. A year after the checkpoint discovery, the final major defendant accepted a plea deal. The network had been effectively destroyed, its infrastructure dismantled, its participants dead, imprisoned, or cooperating with authorities. The case was officially closed, though civil proceedings and appeals would continue for years. The department held a ceremony recognizing everyone who'd contributed to the investigation. Sarah attended with Max, accepting another commendation while feeling the same discomfort with recognition that had characterized her response throughout. She appreciated the acknowledgement, but remained convinced that she'd simply done what any competent officer would have done in her position. After the ceremony, Agent Morrison approached. They hadn't spoken since the federal operation concluded, their paths diverging as Morrison moved to other cases. "Lieutenant Collins, good to see you." "Agent Morrison, how are things at the Bureau?" "Busy. There's always another network, another investigation." Morrison smiled slightly. "But I wanted to thank you personally. That checkpoint discovery gave us the break we needed. Without it, we'd still be conducting surveillance, trying to build probable cause for warrants. You accelerated the timeline by months." Sarah accepted the thanks with a nod. "Max did the detecting. I just followed his lead." "That's what good handlers do," Morrison said, echoing Chen's words from months ago. "The partnership between officer and K-9 is remarkable. I've seen it work many times, but your case was particularly impressive." They talked for a few more minutes about the investigation's aftermath, the federal prosecutions that had followed, the deterrent effect the operation might have on other networks. Then Morrison excused herself, returning to whatever new cases demanded her attention. Sarah left the ceremony with Max, driving through Atlanta streets that had grown familiar over years of patrol. The city was constantly changing, new construction, new businesses, new residents, but the fundamental patterns remained constant. Crime and enforcement, violation and accountability, the eternal dance between those who broke laws and those who upheld them. She thought about her career trajectory, wondering where it would lead. The Donovan case had raised her profile within the department, opening doors to specialized units and leadership positions if she wanted to pursue them. But Sarah found herself reluctant to leave K-9 work. The partnership with Max, the direct impact of detection and apprehension, the clarity of the mission, these elements satisfied her in ways that administrative advancement probably wouldn't. At home that evening, Sarah sat on her couch with Max beside her, his head resting on her lap. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth and solidity of his presence. 8 years old now, starting to show subtle signs of aging in the grey hairs emerging around his muzzle, the slightly slower recovery after hard workouts. Belgian Malinois typically worked until 10 or 11, giving them perhaps 3 more years of active duty together. Sarah tried not to think about retirement, about the day when Max would no longer be certified for field work. She'd heard stories from other handlers about that transition, how difficult it was to adjust to a new partner after years with one dog. Some handlers retired themselves, rather than start over with a new K-9. Sarah understood the impulse, but hoped she'd find the strength to continue if that time came. For now, though, they were still a working team, still effective, still contributing. The Donovan case had proven that their partnership could handle pressure and produce results. Whatever challenges came next, Sarah trusted they'd face them successfully. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through saved photos, stopping at one from the checkpoint operation. Max was in alert position, focused intensely on Donovan's limousine. The image captured perfectly his concentration, his commitment to the task. This was Max at his best, working, detecting, serving his purpose with complete dedication. Sarah set the photo as her phone's wallpaper, a reminder of the moment that had changed so much. Every time she checked her phone, she'd see Max doing what he did best, That seemed appropriate somehow, a daily reinforcement of why she'd chosen this career and this partner. The weeks turned to months, the anniversary of Operation Crossroads passing with minimal fanfare. Life continued its forward motion, new cases replacing old ones, fresh challenges emerging as previous problems were resolved. Sarah and Max maintained their routine, working shifts, conducting searches, training to maintain certification standards. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from the high school where she'd conducted the K-9 demonstration months earlier. The teacher asked if she'd return for career day. Sarah agreed, and the presentation went well. Students asked about the Donovan arrest, about Max's detection capabilities, about maintaining trust after discovering corruption within the department. Sarah answered honestly, focusing on procedure and standards, on the importance of accountability. After the presentation, several students approached with questions and requests for photos with Max. Sarah accommodated them all. Understanding these interactions might influence career choices and shape perceptions of law enforcement. Driving back to the precinct, Sarah reflected on the circularity of influence. She'd been inspired to join law enforcement by officers she'd encountered as a teenager. Now she was potentially inspiring the next generation. The cycle continued. Standards and values transmitted across time through example and mentorship. The remainder of Sarah's shift was routine, patrol, paperwork, a brief training session with another K-9 handler. Mentorship was becoming more frequent in her work, senior officers seeking her insights on K-9 deployment and investigation procedures. She recognized this as career progression, the transition from primarily doing to also teaching. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something prompted her to accept. "Lieutenant Collins, this is Vanessa Donovan." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. She hadn't expected to hear from Donovan's ex-wife again. "I wanted to apologize," Vanessa said, her voice carrying exhaustion, "for the accusations, for attacking you. I was in denial about who Marcus really was. You were doing your job. That was wrong of me. I'm sorry." "I appreciate you calling," Sarah said carefully. "I understand the position you were in." They talked briefly, the conversation awkward but genuine. When they disconnected, Sarah felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized was missing. The apology acknowledged a shared humanity beneath the adversarial legal proceedings. Max wandered over, sensing Sarah's emotional state. She knelt and wrapped her arms around him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. The case was truly over now, emotionally resolved. Tomorrow would bring another shift, another set of challenges. Sarah and Max would face it together, as they'd faced everything since becoming partners. That certainty was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Sarah sat on her kitchen floor with her K-9 partner, grateful for the remarkable chain of events his alert had initiated. The work mattered. The partnership mattered. Together, they would continue making a difference. One detection at a time. That was the job. That was everything.